what he was doing when he was a young person, unlike what a lot of us younger people were doing, or not me, but some of you, is he was working before high school at the family vegetable stand in Harlem, okay? And he was working after high school. Now, there's another candidate running for the Republican conservative nomination. They might call him, I'm not going to mention names, so we're not here to attack anybody. You might call him a country club Republican. This guy is a country club Republican, too. He was a waiter there. That's how he got his way through Florida. Okay. This guy came up the hard way, and he spent 2 terms in Congress. Why did he leave Congress? Did he decide he was going to go back and do the farming? No, he lost that election. But you want to know why? He got reapportioned, and he was in a very liberal Democratic district. He probably should, by all rights, never won it. And in the middle term, he beat Bill Arabzo, which was a big thing for us conservatives. Okay? Since then, he's done a hell of a lot. And I don't mean he became a lobbyist. What did he become? He became a leader in the Italian and Albanian civil rights community. And he's going to tell you more about his background, I'm sure, in his speech. Okay? He formed an organization, a nonprofit, called Truth in Government. He's never made a dime, as far as I know, from government since. This is really what Jefferson was talking about when he was talking about public service. I love this guy. He's got the passion. I've only known him for 3 weeks. And let me tell you something, I think you're going to love him too. Let me introduce to you former Congressman and my friend, Joe DioGuardi. Thank you.
Thank you. I only just met him a couple of weeks ago. Wow. I gotta bring you with me. Are you proud to be American? Yes. Are you ready to take back America? Yes. Let me tell you, we're starting to lose it. And that's why I came to tell you. First of all, I brought you a gift. I wrote a book when I left Congress. Can you hear me pretty well?
Yeah.
Okay. When I left Congress in 1989, I decided that what I saw was so horrific. Don't forget, I'm a trained, certified public accountant. Why is that important? Excuse my back, by the way. Because I think it's better I stay in the middle there. Why is that important? Would you believe when I got to Congress in 1984, and I almost didn't make it, I took a liberal Democratic district back as a Republican, okay? Obviously, I worked with old people who are intelligent. But when I got there, I found out I was the first and only practicing CPA ever elected to the Congress, House or Senate. Now, that's amazing. When I left 4 years later, I counted out of 535 congressmen, don't forget, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, 535, 386 lawyers. And without me, there's no accountant, so everybody's spending, nobody's counting. That's our problem. And I put that on the cover of the book. In fact, what I did, you see me holding that little plastic card there? Same size as a credit card, okay? You know what that is? That's a congressman or congresswoman's voting card. And I realized every time I put that in to the computer terminal, I was raising the national debt because of the deficits. So I said in chapter 1 of this book, and it's all, here it is, it's a gift to you from me, okay? First chapter is the most expensive credit card in the world is a congressman's voting card. And I thought it was bad then. You can't imagine how bad it is today, and I'm going to tell you more about that. Now, why is accounting important? And by the way, I put it on the front cover. I did a mock-up of a congressional credit card, and I said, credit line unlimited, expiration date never, billed to future generations. That was 1992, okay? Was I thinking ahead? Was I like a prophet, Jeremiah? Now, better than that, read chapter 4. I wrote this in very simple Bronx-type English, okay? I had someone make sure there was no grammar, but I had a good Jesuit education. I went to Fordham Prep, Fordham University. Thank God, my parents worked hard, but they realized they didn't have a high school education. They needed to make sure that their son, Joey, had a good education. And I worked hard for it. But when you think about this book, the way I wrote it so that you could read one chapter at a time, because I didn't want you to get depressed by reading the whole book all at once. So it's like Reader's Digest. And chapter 4 is entitled, I gave outrageous titles, The Big Apple and Washington, one bailout after the other. I predicted the insolvency of America. What they're talking about today, you know, hooked on foreign capital, I predicted it, and I predicted another thing. And people said, Joe, come on, can't be. I said, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are definitely going to be a problem the way they're being run. And why? Because they were supposed to be self-sustaining. But every one of those government service enterprises, government-sponsored enterprises, they're called GSEs, should have been self-sustaining. There are 28 of them. Let me give you some. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the Resolution Trust Company for the S&L bailout, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Farm Credit Bureau, the Post Office. They're not self-sufficient. When they run out of money, guess what happens? They float bonds, and they get interest as low. Why? The full faith and credit of the United States of America is behind it. And people said to me in those days, we'll never have to come. Don't worry about that, Joe. It's never going to happen. It happened. That was the bailout. Look what we had to do for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, the worst thing is, you think that's the bad news? It's all off the books. It's like Enron accounting. What happened to Enron? Let me put this down for a minute. What happened to Enron? I'm Italian. I got to shake both hands. What happened to Enron? Think about it. Enron gamed the system by creating something called, I don't want to give you accounting 101, but you can understand this because you read enough about it. Special purpose entities, SPEs. What were they? They kind of gamed the definition to the auditors by saying, oh, we don't control those, therefore they shouldn't be on our balance sheet. So they managed to make deals with Merrill Lynch, or I shouldn't name names, but other companies, and they said, you know, those are not ours. So they managed to put their debts and their losses off the books, keep the profits on, to keep the shareholders coming. A real nice accounting Ponzi scheme, and it collapsed. Guess what we have in the federal government? The same thing. They're called GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises. Because these things are off the books. You lose an election, someone appoints you to a nice $200,000 job. Look at the guy running Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. With the accounting problems they had, bonuses of millions. And guess what they have in New York State? Even worse. And you think the budget deficit is a problem? Think about 600 authorities that are special purpose entities off the books. MTA is one of them. Now, they're all not big, but a lot of them are very small. But the MTA is probably the biggest. The Power Authority is another. The Battery Park Apartment Complex. You lose an election, the governor appoints you to a $200,000 job. You get a big pension. You make sure you get a lot of overtime in the last 3 years, right? It makes a bigger pension. You retire, take the pension, you get another job. You got another pension. Hey, and people are losing their houses, and people lose, and they can't pay their mortgages, and losing their jobs. Come on. This is not the America that my father came here. My father came through Ellis Island at 15, couldn't speak a word of English, 1929. You couldn't pick a worse year. And he lived in Harlem. And thank God they were farmers. Well, they were farmers. I don't know if you say thank God, but thank God he knew that if he sold vegetables, he could make money. And that's what they did in Europe, because they grew it and they sold it. And he found out that the Bronx Terminal Market was right by the Yankee Stadium. So at the age of 16, after shining shoes for 1 year, he decided to buy collard greens, kale, mustard greens, and put them right on a corner in Harlem. And all of a sudden, he's making money. And by 1933, he had a store on St. Nicholas Avenue, 145th Street. And he meets my mother in 1934, and my mother says, you couldn't believe your father. He was the only one with a Willys Knight with a silver wheel and a radio in the car in the Bronx. That's America, right? America, if you work hard and you dream big, you can make it. This is the country. Now, don't we want to pass this opportunity society on to the next generation? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Because we're running out of capital. We're spending money. Now, let me tell you the Joe DioGuardi bottom line. Okay, CPA. We're spending money we don't have. We're borrowing from countries we don't trust that don't share our values. Now, how long can we get away with that? My father didn't come here to Ellis Island to give this country to China. And I'm sure your parents didn't do it either. Is that right or what? Now, why do you think I'm running for the U.S. Senate? You think I don't need another job? I'm doing pretty well. I'm a CPA. I left Congress. I didn't become a paid lobbyist. I became a volunteer lobbyist for the Albanian people who met me in Congress, who I saw being exterminated by that guy Milosevic. My wife and I got him indicted. We went to The Hague and testified against him, and we got a new state called Kosovo. Every Albanian in America, when I announced, will be online to contribute to my campaign, because they know I did it for nothing. I did it because it had to be done. What did Martin Luther King say? If there is injustice anywhere, justice is threatened everywhere. So if there's something that's happening that you don't like, you should not just sit down. And for the Irish group here, let me just quote another great Irish statesman, Edmund Burke. What did he say? All that is necessary for evil to prevail is that good people do nothing. So we have to activate the people. Once the people are activated, then we can be sure that this country will be safe. Okay? So I wanted to give you a sense for the problem. Let me give you some numbers. We have now $12 trillion in national debt. Now, what is that debt? It's the bonded debt. Those are the treasury bills that we have to float in order to make up for the deficits. That's pretty simple, correct? And what's bad about that is that last year the deficit that added to that national debt was $1.4 trillion. We've never had a deficit that big. That is 3 times more than any deficit. But worse than that, our president's already told us that this year's deficit is going to be $1.5 trillion. Now, and then he said that the next 10 years, we're probably going to add $10 trillion to the national debt. That's 10 trillion on top of 12. 12 was at the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2009. Now think about this. If we could keep interest rates down in 5 or 10 years to 5%, I say if. Are you old enough to remember that under Jimmy Carter and the Malays, we had a prime rate of 21%? Does anybody here know that?
Yes.
All right, I know because I had a piece of property back then, and I was paying 15% on that mortgage. But you know what interest rates are. If inflation's 18%, you have to then charge 2 or 3% above it to compensate people for the use of money. So the prime rate went to 21%. Now, you think for 1 minute, with all the money that's being put out by the Federal Reserve System, all the money that's being spent that we don't have, that there's not going to be high inflation in 5 or 10 years? We are keeping the interest rate down to practically zero. They just raised the rate that banks borrow at the discount window from 0.25% to 0.75%. And by the way, look at these banks. They borrow for practically nothing. Instead of lending it out to small businesses, they're investing it into medium-term treasury bills for 3.5–4%. They're making all kinds of profits, and they're giving bonuses. So now we know that they're gaming the system as well. How many people are going to game the system before you get really mad and elect someone like me? So I can go down there and yell and scream, because I am someone who changes things. I just don't talk about it. When you read my bio, and here it is, I did this specially for this race, because people can't believe the things I've accomplished in my life before Congress and after Congress. I worked for a living all the way, and I want you to read this, okay? Because you'll see the kind of action that I'll bring with me into the U.S. Senate. They're sleeping down there. And worse than that, they don't understand the dimension of the accounting problem. It's simple accounting. Now, I just gave you the bad news, 22 trillion. If you could keep interest rates down to 5%, what is 5% on 22 trillion? Approximately over $1 trillion, right? That pushes out all discretionary spending. That is the worst tax on anybody. Worse than taxes is interest, because you have to pay it out to people who have money, and a lot of them are foreigners, like China. And now China's saying, maybe we're not going to lend to you anymore. That could be our problem. Now, I hate to say that I just gave you the good news. Let me give you the really bad news. Guess what's off the books right now? And I yelled and screamed about it. I went to testify. If you look at my Truth in Government website, you'll see me looking at the Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Board, the board that I created with my act called the Chief Financial Officer Act, signed by Bush in 1990. This is the 20th anniversary of it. I went down to tell them, you are in conflict. When I wrote that bill, you were not supposed to be funded by the Treasury Department, the Congressional Budget Office, the Government Accounting Office. You were supposed to be independent like the Fed. And now what you're doing is you're sending accounting principles that government wants to make things look good so they can get reelected. And guess what they kept off the balance sheet? $45 trillion in Social Security and Medicare liabilities. So our national debt is not $12 trillion. It's $12 trillion today, plus the $45 trillion that we know we have to pay, and it's coming down soon. Why? The baby boomers. We got away with this for years because we had many more people working than retiring. We took the money in FICA taxes, Social Security, and what did they do? Do you think there's a trust fund there? Forget it. There's no trust fund. There's no lockbox. He only said that to get elected. I remember Gore, when he was running for president, I will make sure they'll never touch your money. That money was touched a long time ago, and they moved it out and spent it on other things, and they put a treasury bill in there called an IOU. Now, who started that? I'll name names now. And not because he's a Democrat, because Republicans they're just as bad as the Democrats, badly as the Democrats when it comes to spending. Lyndon Baines Johnson was the first one to game the system. What did he do? And it's in my book. Okay? 1968, he realizes the Vietnam War is not popular, it's costing too much, and he comes up with something called the unified budget. What is that? He saw all the surpluses in Social Security. We didn't have Medicare, that was just starting. And he says, why should we just show those surpluses? Why can't I net them against the deficit? And in the budget process, then we have a net deficit. So today, it still continues. When you get the deficit, it's not the real deficit. They already offset it with the surpluses in Medicare and Social Security. And those surpluses are going to disappear pretty soon. Okay? So now, where are we going? Is this the kind of country we want to leave to the next generation? Is this fair? Use the word fair. Are we being fair to our kids, grandkids? No, we're not. So we got to wake up and reduce the size of government. Now let me quote Ronald Reagan. I think you all like Ronald Reagan, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. When he ran in 1980 against Carter, he gave a great speech. And one of the things I remember most, he says, the biggest problem we have is big government. When government gets big, the bureaucracy gets big, it obstructs growth. And he said, the closest thing to eternal life in Washington is a government program. Once it's in, you can never get it out. And it's the same thing with taxes. Don't let anybody tell you we have a temporary tax. It doesn't exist. Once you pass it, you cannot get rid of a tax. That's the way it is. So I saw some quotes. I'm going to conclude. I know. I'm ready, right? You got the hook? All right. I saw some quotes that I want to give you. Thomas Jefferson. Someone emailed this to me yesterday. And you know, I knew Thomas Jefferson had a great mind, one of our founding fathers, because I remember what he said about information. Information is the currency of democracy. If you're not informed, there cannot be a democracy. But I didn't know he had quotes like this. I'm going to show my age and put my glasses on. Listen to this. When we get piled upon one another in large cities, as in Europe, we shall become as corrupt as Europe. Then he said, okay, let me go to the fiscal stuff. I don't want to give you all that. Fiscal. Okay. Democracy will cease to exist when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who will not or would not work. Another one. It is incumbent upon every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. A principle which, if acted on, would save 1/2 of the wars in the world. So he's saying we shouldn't be passing debts on from one generation to another. I think that's pretty fair. Then he goes, another quote. They're all individual. I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. How do you like that one? And then what does he say at the end? My reading of history convinces me that most bad government results from too much government. I think we have too much government. I'm just going to conclude by telling you what we're doing in Westchester about that. And then the final quote, there's many, but let me read the one about banks. It's like he was here today. Listen to this one. 1802, Thomas Jefferson said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent that their fathers conquered. Now, this is Thomas Jefferson, 18... You know, they say that you gotta, read history so that you can learn from it and not repeat it, okay? So with that, what can I say? There must be some good news. Let me think about it. The good news is that America still has that great spirit that attracted my parents here from Southern Italy, and it's still a great opportunity society. But we have to shift the emphasis from Washington back to Main Street. And let me tell you what I'm doing in my county. You may have to do it in your own. Westchester County is now the highest tax county of 3,000 counties in America. They are mad. They just put out the county executive, 12-year incumbent. They just switched to another person. I won't mention. It went from Democrat to Republican. And now you see what's happening in Massachusetts. You saw what happened to the governor of Jersey, the governor. So the people are speaking, okay? And I think that's important. In Westchester County, I started with a Democrat because I believe in doing things with smart people on the other side of the aisle. Paul Feiner, the supervisor of Greenberg, and I started something called Rethinking Westchester County Government. We found a law from 1952 that says you can have a referendum. It's called the Alternative Form of County Government Law, and they give you 4 choices. We picked one. I'm collecting right now with my brother and sister, my neighbors, 25,000 signatures to be put on the next ballot in order to reduce, for a charter revision commission, to define Westchester County government. We got to do that to the federal government as well. God bless you all for listening to me, and it makes me on the ballot.
Very good. Good job, good job. Mr. Jones, good morning. You got a book for everyone over here. All right, Joe DioGuardi, we all know his lovely daughter, right?
That's okay.
Cara DioGuardi on American Idol.
Is he?
That's his daughter.
That is my daughter, believe it or not.
And for Cara DioGuardi. But Bill Cirillo's here. We got 40 members.
Phil. P-H-I-L, right?
Yes. All right, Dave.
That was a great speech. I agree with everything you said.
Kind of common sense, you know.
Yes.
And I don't try to be an ideologue.
Oh, Steve Lottery. How can Steve Lottery? Here you go. We got all right. We got some of the folks. And again, Judge Costello. Where you go? We got Mr. Gary. Don't ask him for $1.
Newman. Gary.
He might have $1.
Take it personal.